July 20th meeting of the Architectural Review Committee to order. Erica, would you do a roll call for us, please?
Sure. Chair Hunter,
Present.
Vice Chair Tregenza.
Here.
Committee Member Bluth has let us know that he will be absent. Committee Member Carter.
Present.
Committee Member Ostavar.
Here.
Committee Member Polly.
Here.
And Committee Member Schmidt.
Here.
Okay, I'll go ahead and announce the staff members present. We have Principal Planner Roveri, Senior Associate Planner Schmidt, Associate Planner Buggard, and myself, Recording Secretary Barrera.
All right, thank you, Erica. Next, what I'd like to do is open the consent agenda. That in this particular case, if there are any member of the committee or public that would like to speak on any of the consent items, and open that up this time for comments. Good.
Should I let the public know how to join?
Yes, oh, I'm sorry. Yes, please, please give the instructions on how the members of the public can join online.
Sure. Members of the public are encouraged to join our meetings via Zoom Gov, a secure service that connects you live with no lag time. This meeting is also streamed live on youtube.com/City of Monterey. It's also streamed on Comcast Channel 25. If you would like to provide public comment, please join the meeting using Zoom or by telephone, making sure to join in time to accommodate delays. To join the Zoom meeting from a computer or phone, use the link or phone numbers on the agenda posted at isearchmonterey.org. Since this meeting has started, you'll find the agenda under the Recent tab. To join by telephone, dial 833-568-8864, then enter the webinar ID. Today's webinar ID is 161-914-9563. To provide public comment via Zoom, please use the raise your hand function at the bottom of your screen. To provide comments by phone, dial *9 to raise your hand, then *6 to unmute when called upon. Public commenters will be announced using their last 3 phone number digits or the name they've typed into Zoom. Public commenters will be muted until it is their turn to speak. Please turn off TV or computer speakers or go to another room while connected, as background noise interferes with the broadcast. Public speakers will be called upon in order of hands raised. There is a 3-minute time limit for today's meeting. Please stay within that minute.
All right, thank you, Erica. There are no comments there. Any discussion on the consent agenda from the committee members? No, I'll entertain a motion on the consent items.
I'll move to approve the item on the consent agenda. That's it. Anybody want a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all right, we've had the motion from Vice Chair Tregenza and seconded by Committee Member Ostavar. Call a roll call for vote, please, Erica.
Chair Hunter,
Aye.
Vice Chair Tregenza,
Aye.
Committee Member Carter,
Aye.
Committee Member Ostavar,
Aye.
Committee Member Polly,
Aye.
and Committee Member Schmidt.
Aye.
Okay, the minutes are approved as submitted with a vote of 6.
Okay, next, I'll open up for public comments for items that are not on today's public appearance agenda.
There are 3 attendees, but no hands are raised.
All right, we'll close the public comments and open the public appearance. So we'll look at the first public appearance item, which is considering the 1300 Moonross Avenue Architectural Review Application ARP-22-0035 for preliminary and final architectural review of detached shed. Does the staff have a presentation?
Yes.
Can I ask? I believe Member
Okay,
Paul
so I need,
was going to recuse himself.
yeah, I live 2 doors down from this. And so just to confirm, Fernanda, I'm not allowed to comment or in any way, shape or form on this.
Right, not at all. So
Okay.
I can send you an email when we're done with the item so you can log back in.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
All right, I will share my screen. Good afternoon. My name is Matthew Buggert, and I am a associate planner with the City of Monterey's Planning Division. Before us today, we have 1300 Monterey Avenue for architectural review permit for a detached shed at today's Architectural Review Committee, July 20th, 2022. Today's recommendation from staff is to adopt the resolution approving the architectural review permit and associated conditions of approval. The subject property is a Super 8 visitor accommodation facility at 1300 Monterey Avenue. It's in the southern part of the city, somewhat near to Del Monte Center. Looking at the right image, to the north and south are commercial properties. Across the street is an open space area between Monterey Avenue and Del Monte Center. And there are some residential properties that go into the neighborhood behind the Super 8. The zoning at the parcel is VAF, Visitor Accommodation Facility. The proposal is the installation of a detached shed within an area that I'll talk about in just a moment. A building permit was not required. The applicant checked in with the building department, and it's almost exactly 120 square feet. Anything that's under 120 square feet that's not permanently affixed to the ground and has no electrical elements to it, no light sockets, outlets, and such, did not meet the definition of structure and does not require a building permit through Building and Safety. There was a neighbor complaint about the installation of the shed. Section 38-37A, non-structural alterations in the VAF zoning district are subject to review and approval by the ARC. The code compliance officer contacted the property owner, and so this is effectively a retroactive architectural review permit since the shed is already installed at the site. The property view without the shed, I went back a little bit in Google Maps. This is what the site looked like previously. And this is a rough image aerial of the site. The shed would be 8 by 12, and it would be within an area that used to have a pool. They filled it with concrete. There's a shade structure there, and it's kind of their recreational outdoor area for the hotel. The shed is being used as the storage of umbrellas and chairs and various hotel type stuff to be stored in there. The shed itself is it's this part peeking up over here. You can see the angled shed and 3 windows looking out over the top of the walled area. There are cars in front of it. I'm going to go back 2 photos for the comparison. The shed was installed right here. And an alternative view of the installed shed is here. It is 9 feet and 3 inches. The wall around it at its highest point is about 6 feet. The topographical grade changes a little bit on the outside, but it's extending about 3.5 feet or so above that wall. The findings required for approval of the structure is that the proposed siding, form, mass, and architectural style are appropriate. It meets the development standard, setbacks, appropriate siding. It is far removed from the property boundaries. The massing scale and style must be found compatible, or is generally compatible with the commercial area. It's a shed. It is tan. The trim on it is white, which matches the building. Another finding is that views, privacy, and the living environment must not be impaired. No impacts were identified. Noticing was put out about the shed and this hearing. The project does not unreasonably impair views from the surrounding areas. Additionally, the project must be found consistent with city plans and design guidelines. It is generally consistent with the general plan and development standards. The exterior finish, colors, materials, and all other exterior features must be found to be appropriate. As similarly stated previously, the colors of the shed roughly match the existing walls, tan and trim colors of white. The conditions of approval in there, the project would be, there are no special conditions. The project would be required to adhere to those conditions of approval. If there's any alterations in the future, they would need to come back to architectural review to the ARC. And so the final recommendation of staff is to adopt the resolution approving the architectural review permit with the associated conditions of approval. With that, that concludes staff's presentation. I think the applicant is on the line, available for questions. I did not get a final confirmation, so.
All right, thank you, Matthew. To start off, I'll open up for committee members, questions that have questions for Matthew.
Yeah, you mentioned that there was a neighbor complaint. I did not see that in the folder of public comments. Is that something they can share with us?
I cannot. As far as I know, it was a phone call, and the correspondence between our code compliance officer and the property owner was done informally. There was not a letter issued. The applicant said okay and then applied for this permit.
And so there's no, you don't know the nature of the complaint.
I do not.
Matthew, when was the shed installed?
The project became aware to us in November
2020.
2021,
Okay.
roughly. It was the end of
Mhm.
2021.
Yes, it was last year.
Just curious.
So is this coming through architecture review now because of the neighbor complaint? I just want to be clear.
The
Oh, sorry. So yes, a complaint was made to our code compliance division, and we looked at it and we found out it required a permit. And so that's why it's now a retroactive architectural review permit.
So it requires an ARC permit, but not a building permit.
Right.
it's another reason for the slight delay. There was some deliberations regarding this.
If I could add just a bit of context, this visitor accommodation facilities, hotels and motels have a very specific zoning in the city of Monterey that are the development standards are dictated by the city's charter. So there are some more what staff might require, some of the permits that staff might require for hotel projects might be more than what might be required for a commercial or residential property. This similar scope at a commercial property or a residential property is typically administrative, but the charter and the VAF development standards require ARC review.
I guess thank you, Chris. I'm just trying to understand how, I guess I don't know, maybe I've seen that when something has not required a building permit, but only required an ARC permit.
I think Matthew mentioned that this shed is less than 120 square feet and it doesn't have any electrical. So it didn't require a building permit, and it's not intended to be occupied.
I get all that. I'm just confused why they're not mutually exclusive. Like why they are mutually exclusive and we don't have to have a building permit, but we do have to have an ARC permit to make sure it fits with the character.
Yeah, so for instance, the section that I mentioned earlier, section 38-37A, states that architectural review is needed for ordinary non-structural repairs, alterations, exterior remodeling, changes in landscaping or planting areas, or maintenance. So it's pretty well encompassing for the VAF zone specifically.
Got it. Okay, yeah. So it includes landscaping and all that stuff, which makes sense.
I have another question. So if you said they came to the city and asked if they needed a building permit for the shed.
I do not have that in a paper record. It was as discussed between myself, the building department, and the applicant.
Because I just want to, like, for future projects where it's like, hey, do I need a building permit for this shed? You're a hotel or VAF or whatever. And they say, well, no, you don't need a building permit, but you are a hotel. You will need an ARC permit. And they should have been told that before they spent the $8,000 for the shed, right? So there should be something in place that a light goes off and says, yeah, this requires ARC, and we want to make sure that you apply for that permit before you go ahead and make the expense and put this shed in. Because we could tell them that we don't like it, we need to tear it down now, which doesn't seem fair, because they did come forward through a phone call or whatever and say, hey, do we need a building permit for this? And they were told no. And now here we are throwing more, red tape at them. So I'm not sure what the answer to that is, but it sounds like, the policies have to be well understood by staff, and so that they can call those things out when somebody has a question or wants to build a shed.
This is exactly what I was trying to understand.
Matt, can you confirm, after the public noticing of this meeting and this project, after the fact permit project, did you hear from anybody? I'm just curious if the neighbor that made the original complaint had anything to say. But I just wanted to confirm. I didn't see any mention of it, and you didn't say anybody had made any complaints, but I wanted to confirm.
I should have mentioned that there were no received comments, complaints, no emails or phone calls.
Thank you.
All right. If there are no other committee questions from the committee, is there applicant online? Are they available, or they want to make a statement?
There
Or
are attendees. I don't see the applicant online. Unless they're under a different name. Yeah, there's no Patel online.
okay. All right. If not there, go ahead and open up if there are any member of the public that would like to make a comment on this. Erica, would you give the information how to contact it again if they're online?
Sure. Once again, to join the meeting from a computer or phone, use the link or phone numbers on the agenda posted at isearchmonterey.org. To join by telephone, dial 833-568-8864, then enter the webinar ID. Today's webinar ID is 161-914-9563. To provide public comment via Zoom, please use the raise your hand function at the bottom of your screen. To provide comments by phone, dial *9 to raise your hand, then *6 to unmute when called upon. Public commenters will be announced using their last 3 phone number digits or the name typed into Zoom. And I don't see any hands raised.
All right. Is there any member of the public here in the chamber that would like to make any comment on? Okay. All right. I'll go ahead and close public comment on this agenda item and open up for committee member comments and discussion.
I already kind of made some comments during the question part, and I apologize for that. But if this came to us, with drawings, I'd probably say no. It's like, I don't want, every motel on Monterey to have, these freestanding sheds just because they want to put their lawn furniture away or whatever. But it's already been done. I went out and checked it out today. It's mostly hidden by the shade structure, which is kind of another question. Like, that doesn't get ARC approval, and it's even almost taller than the shed, but it's another, non-permanent structure. So, you can't really see it as you're going up Monterey or even walking on the sidewalk, just for a little glimpse. I personally don't think it adds any appeal to the property itself, but I understand the need for storage when you have a business. So, it's kind of too late to, I'd hate to, make them get rid of it because they had a big expense. We were given the cost of the shed in our packet, and it's significant. And they did come to the city and ask if they needed a permit, and they were told no. So, yeah, that's my 2 cents.
I just want to clarify that shade structure also requires a permit, and we're following up with the applicant because it the applicants installed it after the code compliance case was opened.
But there was a picture of the shade structure that was up before the shed was built. That
Yeah,
first
it
picture.
was there before the shed as
Oh, it
well.
was?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we are following up because that also needed a permit.
Okay. Well, we'll visit that. I mean, I personally like the shade structure because it blocks the view of the shed. So I think it's a win-win, but yeah, I think we have to be careful that we don't just, we keep an eye on these, that's a main drag of Monterey, people coming in and out of the city. And it's kind of a, gateway to Monterey. It used to be the gateway to Carmel on your way to Carmel. And that's where, people would stay in the cheaper motels in Monterey. And we just have to keep an eye on it and make sure that, it doesn't start looking kind of tacky and start throwing, Costco sheds up because you want to put your chaise lounges away in the winter. So, yeah.
I just hope that this is an experience in how we can try to communicate with our community better. Because, now we're almost a year after the fact and we're trying to retroactively approve an ARC permit. And this isn't the first time this has happened with this committee. And I know that the city can't monitor everything, but it just seems to me like putting these property owners and small businesses through more red tape coming out of the pandemic is a lot for them, especially after they've made expenditures. So I just hope that in the future, we can consider that when we're working with people who come to the office, ask questions, be clear about what they need, and not throw extra blocks in a way.
All right. Thank you. For me, my comments, I'll agree and just echo the comments that Committee Member Carter made on this of, looking a way of moving forward with this without coming back retroactively to approve actions that have already been taken by the business owners and property owners. No other comments. I'll entertain a motion on this application.
I was just going to say similar comment to both Carter and Tregenza. I think it is that, if you look at this site now, we have several different roof types and structures. And so you have the shade structure, which is a different type. You have the shed structure, which is different from that. And you have all the rest of the existing or original structure, and all of those are different as well. So, had this been sent to us beforehand, perhaps we would have had different comments. And it does put us in a tricky situation where we're sort of being asked this tough question of would we be asking somebody to tear something out? Is it that bad, or is it something that we think is acceptable and we can live with given what the applicants have already gone through? So it's a little bit of a challenging situation to put the ARC in with something like that, but I think we can handle it and deal with it in the appropriate fashion.
Thank you.
I'll move to approve 1300 Moonris Avenue architectural review application ARP 22-0035 for preliminary and final architectural review of a detached shed.
I'll second that.
Okay, we've had the motion from Vice Chair Tregenza to approve the architectural review application ARP 22-0035 for 1300 Moonris Avenue, and seconded by Committee Member Carter. So, Erica, will you do a roll call for the vote, please?
Sure. Chair Hunter,
Aye.
Vice Chair Tregenza,
Aye.
Committee Member Carter,
Aye.
Committee Member Ostavar,
Aye.
Committee Member Polly is recused. Committee Member Schmidt.
Aye.
Okay, this motion carries with a vote of 5. The decision is appealable to the Planning Commission within 10 days, and we have applications in the planning office or online.
Okay, thank you. Fernando, you sent an email, asked Justin Pauly to join us again, please. Okay. See. Back then.
Is he back?
All right. All right. Next, we'll move on to the agenda item of 700 Grove Street Architectural Review Permit ARP-22-0049 for preliminary and final architectural review for exterior alterations, including a replacement carport and balcony above, new workshop and new gable roof at the second story of an existing two-story family dwelling. All right. Have a staff report, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My name is Chris Schmidt. I'm a senior associate planner with the City of Monterey, and I've been working with the applicant and owner on this project. So staff's recommendation is to approve the project with conditions of approval. Just some background information about the site. It's an 8,100 square foot site in the Monterey neighborhood. It contains an existing two-story single-family dwelling, and you can see it's at the corner of Alameda and Grove. So moving on to the site plan. So this site plan shows the existing home footprint with the lines that I've shown here. So the kind of an orange color is the existing balcony deck area, and then in blue is the existing dining room that has a flat roof. This applicant is proposing to better incorporate the roof for the balcony and part of the adjacent part of the home there with some gable roof structures, as well as rebuilding the carport and then rebuilding the balcony above. So here's the first floor plan in the immediate area of the carport replacement. So as you'll see, they're replacing this carport, adding a workshop on the top part of the image there. And you can see the stair at the exterior of the workshop that goes up to the balcony. And then moving on to the second floor plan, as I mentioned, the whole balcony deck area is being rebuilt. The existing dining room will generally be maintained in the same location with some changes to the roof, and you'll see those on the elevations on the following slides. So we have the south and west elevations. So the south elevation is that elevation on the left-hand side. The top left is the existing condition. The bottom left is the proposed. So you'll see it's an entirely new carport. And then I think more importantly, what requires ARC review is this new roof line. And it's a nicely done new roof. You know, the existing flat roof was a later addition to this older home. And it would better incorporate that part of the home into the existing dwelling. And then on the right-hand side, you see the west elevation. So that's if we were looking at the aerial, that would be the property line on the left-hand side that's shared with another property on Grove. And that would be the view that you could see. So again, on the top right is existing, and the bottom right is proposed. And then this is the north elevation. There's a shared property line with a neighbor on, I'm already forgetting the street and I just meant to mention it, but nevertheless, again, it's a new roof line is the primary feature here that I've highlighted with the orange box, and then the rebuilt carport, that's the back side of that carport, and new workshop, as well as the balcony above. And you'll see that balcony does have a privacy wall that's I think about 6 feet in height. So it's similar to the existing deck's privacy wall, so it maintains some of that privacy that's currently enjoyed at the property. So the one thing that staff noted in the staff report is that there are a number of trees that surround the existing deck at that west side. You know, they are proposing to expand the carport a bit to make way for that workshop, and there'd be a bit of grading there. So staff has requested or recommended a condition that they have an arborist on site during any sort of trenching. And if that arborist determines they need to remove that tree, they'll have to apply for a permit. I think their goal is to preserve those trees, but it is pretty close. And so if they're going to have to do any sort of root cutting super close to the trunk of that tree, that could detrimentally, you know, kill those trees. Their options are to get a tree removal permit where they may be required to plant replacement trees based on the condition and health of the existing tree. In certain cases, a larger replacement tree is required for a large, you know, mature tree. And then that arborist will also be able to know if any root cutting will kill the tree. So I briefly mentioned that condition. They'll also be required to paste the tree protection standards on the building permit plan set. So there are 4 findings that the ARC has to make to approve the project. Staff was able to make these findings, the first being that the proposed siding, form, mass, and architectural style are appropriate. In this case, the staff was able to make the finding. It meets the development standards, and it doesn't expand upon the existing non-conforming setbacks that exist at where they're rebuilding some of those roof lines. The new carport and roof are similar in scale and style to the existing dwelling. The next finding is that views, privacy, and living environment are not unreasonably impaired. There would be no new views into neighboring homes, and neighbors have provided a letter of support, which is attached to your resolution as Exhibit C. The third finding is that the project is consistent with city plans and design guidelines. It is consistent with the city's zoning ordinance development standards and the single-family residential general plan land use designation, in that it is single-family in character. And then lastly, the finding, staff was able to make the finding that the exterior finish, colors, materials, and all other exterior features are appropriate in that they'll match the existing in the same types of materials and colors. So staff's recommendation is to approve the project. I'm available for questions. The property owner is here as well, and maybe the designer is on the call. I'm not sure. Okay, he is. Great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. Open up for the committee members for comments or questions for Chris.
I take it a tree survey has not been done yet to just identify the species of trees.
That's correct.
I was just curious, Chris, why they're sticking with the carport and not converting that to a garage? Is there a zoning reason for that?
It was their original intent to put a garage. It wouldn't have met the floor area ratio standard to enclose it.
I see. Thank you.
Is the in that building section where they're very close to the trees, I think it was the drawings that you brought up when you were talking about the trees and the need to have an arborist on site during construction. Is that a continuous footing? Right there on the right-hand side, is that the footing that will be directly adjacent to those trees?
Yeah, so if you can see the proposed site plan, it's very small, but there's the tree at the corner on the left-hand side that will be basically really directly adjacent to those footings.
And that is a continuous footing. That's not just a post footing, that's continuous all along the back of the building?
That's my understanding. I would ask the designer to confirm that.
Any other questions for Chris? Not open up for if applicant or designer care to make a comment at this time.
I see Mark Edwin Norris on the line. His hand isn't raised, but I can go ahead and allow him to speak.
Yeah, please.
There he is. Okay, I've asked him to unmute.
I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead,
Yeah.
please.
Okay, yes, this is Mark Norris. I'm the designer for the project, and I believe those are maple trees, and the intention is for that to be a continuous footing. It's a retaining wall. There's also post footings for the corner posts, which will support the little lights, little twinkling lights. What it's shown in the back is 2 trees is actually a single tree. I drew the trunks of the trees at the level of the deck in the floor plan. But if you'll see the photographs or see the rear elevation, you'll see that those trunks merge at the ground. And the arborist will certainly have a lot to do with whether or not that footing has gaps or if the engineer has to be called in for a modification.
Any questions for designer?
Thank you for chiming in. I just want to make sure, so your goal and the owner's goal is to retain all the trees.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Thank you.
Is that footing for the workshop, is that an existing footing and then the new footings are going on the uphill side of that?
No,
On
the
this
workshop
drawing?
is new. There are existing footings for the existing deck, but they're isolated pier footings.
So all the footings shown in that framing section are new.
Yes, that's right.
Any other questions for either staff or the applicant or designer? Okay. All right, if none, we'll open up, we remind members of the public if they want to comment on this particular agenda item, how they can contact us online.
Sure. To join the meeting from a computer or phone, use the link or phone numbers on the agenda posted at isearchmonterey.org. To join by telephone, dial 833-568-8864, then enter the webinar ID. Today's webinar ID is 161-914-9563. To provide public comment via Zoom, please use the raise your hand function at the bottom of your screen. To provide comments by phone, dial *9 to raise your hand, then *6 to unmute when called upon. Public commenters will be announced using their last 3 phone number digits or the name they've typed into Zoom. And I don't see any hands raised.
All right. Thank you, Erica. We have a member of public who'd like to speak. You state your name and welcome.
You need the mic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Molly Erickson. I rise today simply to support this tasteful addition that looks very consistent with the house and the neighborhood. I was privileged to know Sean Flavin and Becky Flavin, who lived in the house for many decades. And I simply wanted to make the record because the historic report for this property really did him a disservice and went right over him, because Sean Flavin was probably the most important person to live in that house. I'm not suggesting that it's historic and is entitled to designation or that, because I think this is a consistent and very appropriate addition. I simply wanted to honor Sean and Becky, who I think would support this project addition before you here today, because he was very notable. He essentially, literally wrote the book on California property taxation as an attorney. And 50 years later, at age of 91, when he died, was still writing his the latest update. So he was the man. He wrote the book and he was the statewide expert. And he knew good architecture. He grew up in a Carmel Highlands home that was not originally designed by, but was essentially redesigned by Charles Green of Green and Green. And he himself was one of the founders of the Monterey Parks District. So we have a lot of acreage and outdoor space to thank for Sean. They made their home there for decades, and I think Sean and Becky would be pleased with this new proposal. Thank you.
All right, thank you. That's an interesting perspective in history. Thanks for sharing that with us. Appreciate your comments. Right, if no other comments from the public, open up to comments from the committee members.
I went by today to see it firsthand. And I think it's a beautiful, one of my favorite neighborhoods. It's a beautiful older house. It was built in 1912, I believe. And I think that the new gable is going to help balance. There's kind of an asymmetrical gable from that one elevation. I think it looks like they've done all their homework, and it's going to be a nice improvement. And yeah, it's a beautiful lot with just huge shade trees, and so there's very little view shed disruption to any of their neighbors with the proposal. So I'm in support of it.
Thank you, Patrick. And I'll second that. I went by today, looked at, and in reviewing the information provided in the staff report on this, I think that this is an excellent project, well designed, and I think it will fit probably better with the character of the house than the current situation with it. And it is a beautiful neighborhood with a lot of trees. If whatever can be done to conserve those trees there, I think would be a very positive step forward. So I agree. I think this is a well thought out and nice design. Any other comments? All right, if not, I'll entertain a motion on this application.
I'll make a motion to approve architectural review permit ARP 22-0049 for preliminary and final architectural review.
Okay, thank you.
I second the motion.
All right, thank you. The motion has been made to approve the architectural review permit ARP -22-0049 for 700 Grove Street. Motion was made by Committee Member Carter and seconded by Committee Member Schmidt. So Eric, will you do a roll call vote for us, please?
Sure. Chair Hunter,
Aye.
Vice Chair Tregenza,
Aye.
Committee Member Carter,
Aye.
Committee Member Ostavar,
Aye.
Committee Member Polly,
Aye.
and Committee Member Schmidt.
Aye.
Okay, that motion carries with a vote of 6. The decision is appealable to the Planning Commission within 10 days. We have applications online or in our planning office.
Okay, thank you.
My apologies very quickly. Did this included the recommendations from Planning Commission, correct?
Yes.
From staff that.
From staff, correct. Just making sure we were also approving the recommendation. Yeah.
That was the intent, I believe. Yeah.
Is that how we have it recorded there?
I think you mentioned
The conditions.
So we mentioned conditions.
Oh, good point. All right, thank you, Pam. Should we, how do we go about it? Do we amend, make sure that they're stated with the recommended conditions? Conditions recommended by the staff are included in the motion and a
Yeah,
vote? Or-
So that's assumed, unless you make unless you note otherwise,
Okay.
but it's assumed that you're approving the resolution as
There's something
presented.
I need to call out specifically.
No,
Thank you. Good, nice, good question there, Pam. Appreciate it. Okay. All right, next, we'll consider the 351 Watson Street Architectural Review Permit ARP -21-0162 for preliminary and final architectural review of an exterior alterations, including 2-story addition and roof deck to an existing 2-story single-family dwelling. Staff have a report on this, please?
No,
Mike's not on.
yes, I'll start over. Thank you. Again, this is Chris Schmidt from the City of Monterey Planning Office, Senior Associate Planner. Staff's recommendation in your report was to deny this project based on the fact that there were Permit Streamline Act deadlines. The applicant in this case has agreed to extend those deadlines, and so the recommendation is to continue the item for redesign. And I don't think that we've set a date to continue to, so it would be to a date uncertain. Just some background. So the site is a 4,522.5 square foot site, which is a substandard lot. It contains an existing 2-story single family dwelling. It is located in Old Town on Watson Street, and it also fronts an alley, Cooper Street. So here's the site plan. There's in this location, there's an existing deck and an addition that was added after the home was constructed. It was a later addition, non-original. And here we see that addition location. So it would be a new family room at the main floor, and then a bedroom below, and then there would be a roof deck at the above. And then they would also expand their laundry room to make way for a new bathroom. So on the top images, we see the existing side elevations. And then on the bottom, you see the proposed. So you can see that addition at the rear. Like I said, it's a 2-story addition with a roof deck above. That roof deck would have kind of a parapet style railing that would match the exterior. The siding of the proposal would match the exterior of the dwelling. Here are the front and rear elevations, the front on the left-hand side and rear on the right. Existing is at the top and proposed is on the bottom. And so really the most prominent change you can tell at the bottom right at the rear, there's the addition, and it's a rather large 2-story addition that has a little bit different style from the existing with this flat roof style. We did have a number of public comments for this project. First from the Erickson family, who own the property next door at 359 Watson Street. And I'm paraphrasing, they have many comments, but generally that the design is incompatible with the existing dwelling. And then they have concern for privacy due to the roof deck and the south-facing windows, and that the roof deck would set a new precedent for development in the Old Town area. And then the other comment was from Mimi Sheridan, who is the president of AMAP, which is the Alliance. I couldn't get the first word. Alliance of Monterey Area Preservationists. And Mimi had similar comments that the design is incompatible with the existing dwelling and the neighborhood, and that the project should be compatible with the historic style of the existing dwelling. So I'm not, this is a graphic that was provided by Miss Molly Erickson in her letter that was sent to the ARC, I believe yesterday. The Erickson family has put together this graphic to show the outline of the addition, and they've shown the south elevation that would be viewed from their deck, and just to understand what that impact would be in terms of privacy impacts. And so they've created these images of people on the deck as well as of the windows as well. And I'll state their concern was just for the design, generally the massing style and privacy. So the applicant, as I mentioned, did decide that he would request continuance, and did suggest, found a photo to provide to me of a design that he thinks that he would be willing to change to, that would not include any sort of deck. And so this isn't exactly how he would do it, but it would essentially be a rear gable addition I think his goal in the case of his design would be to have kind of that window facade at the rear elevation, while the side elevations would not match this. They would match the same exterior materials as proposed with the addition, and that match the existing dwelling. And I think he may also include some windows on the side. So I just wanted to show that to the ARC in case there were comments on what sort of design alternatives may be acceptable for the ARC and the public. I don't think that we want to get too specific on what we would recommend, but more so, the flat roof, more general comments like, the flat roof proposal or roof deck proposal does not seem to work in this case, but maybe a gable does. Maybe a gable such as this, or maybe a hipped roof gable is more appropriate. Those are the types of comments that I think would be acceptable. So again, staff's recommendation is to continue the item for redesign. I'm available for questions. I think the homeowner is on the call as well. And I think we're just looking for any sort of guidance that might come from the ARC and the public just generally. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Chris. Good presentation. On that, I'll open up for questions for Chris from the committee.
Can you just clarify your last comment a little more? Why, if this is not being approved, why is it getting to our desk? Is that just because we're separate desks and they both need to get reviewed independently?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand your question.
It sounds like you're not approving this through planning, even that it doesn't fit some of the general area plans and things like that. That's your recommendation at least, but is that not the case? Planning is approving this, except the recommendation to us is to not approve it?
No, I think when we reviewed this project, there were, the project met a lot of the, or it met all of the objective design standards, meaning it met basically the minimum requirements in terms of setbacks, lot coverage, floor area, height, etc. Some of the subjective design guidelines are ones that, specifically one that I called out in the staff report, really call for having your additions not be bulky and to be better incorporated with the design of the dwelling. And in the case of this project, we kind of went back and forth on that, and ultimately the staff's decision was that it couldn't be supported, in addition to some of the comments that were received as well.
And I think a little bit of confusion might be coming from that. Usually when something is continued, there's no staff presentation, but so we're continuing it so we can expect another presentation at the next ARC meeting. But we did a presentation and we're just looking for comments on a potential redesign.
Right.
I think I think that it should be incumbent on the client to redesign their own project and bring that back to us. I get the idea of looking for comments.
That's fine. We don't have to take comments. That's completely fine.
Okay.
I do have a question, Chris. In one of the packets, you talked about the fact that this house was on some sort of historical list, and because of modifications made by the owner, it was taken off that as a historical list.
It's still on the list.
Okay. Maybe that was one of the neighbor letters that mentioned that.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So that was not correct, and it's still on the list.
It's still on the list. It has not been formally removed. There is a process to have it removed. The historic report that was prepared for the property supports its removal, but they have not applied for that.
With that, is that something that if they apply for removal, does that have to go through the Historical Preservation Committee, or is that
Correct.
it does?
Yeah.
Okay, understand.
If it has not been removed, does the addition have to be deemed consistent with the Secretary of the Interior standards for?
Correct.
So right now, that's basically when they come back with a new project, we're going to have to, and they haven't gone to the Historic Review Board, we're not only going to have to view the project in the context of the zoning regulations, we're also going to have to view it in the context of whether or not it's consistent with the Secretary of the Interior standards.
Right. Yeah. And typically we rely on a historian to prepare those findings.
Yeah, this is a comment for if that's the case, that it almost seems like a couple of things need to happen. For one is a decision or action to determine what the status of the historical nature of this home is. And if it's something that is going to have to first go to the Historical Preservation Committee, whether it stays on or is removed or not, and then when it comes back to us, is it still something that we would have purview over if the Historical Preservation Committee is already active on it? Would be
correct. If they go through the process and are successful with removing it from the historic survey list, then there's no finding for its consistency with the Secretary's standards. It's not a requirement to remove it from the list, but the project must still be found to be consistent.
understand.
So at this point, I think that if the ARC doesn't have any specific comments, they don't want to comment on what sort of alternative style is appropriate, I think you can make a motion and we can continue the hearing.
Well, I'll just chime in. Since if you're looking for opinions on this.
Well, are we still in question? Are we still in questions, right? I think we're still just in questions.
Any questions? Yeah.
Okay. I guess I have one more question. Do these, typically we talk about the context and things like that. And I mean, I do see a neighbor that actually has a structure that looks rather similar. Probably also wasn't approved, it would be my guess, but so just I'm curious how much, obviously we have, I guess, the authority to use our judgment based on what it should be, but it is interesting to know some of the context.
So, sorry, to answer your question, I mean, when we look at our findings for approval, the findings do include, basically appropriateness, not just for the existing dwelling, but for the neighborhood.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Just I guess this is the second upper level roof deck we've seen. I missed the last meeting, but I know the one before we saw a similar one, and it was similarly contentious, maybe for different reasons. But as an architect, we're seeing this in Pebble Beach, we're seeing it in Carmel, we're seeing it in Seaside, we're seeing it in Monterey. Does the city have any guidelines on roof decks? Because they seem to be something that's appearing on numerous projects, and if not, are we just looking at them in the context of, is this compliant with the building height?
That's correct, the latter. So there are no specific guidelines. If they have been approved in the past, roof decks above a second story. I can recall at least one that I've seen in my tenure in New Monterey. I think that we will see more of them in the future, and I think the question that the ARC is going to have to ask is, should we consider them to be privacy impacts, or the ARC is going to have to draw the line on what constitutes that privacy impact. Some can be done tastefully. And I, that's as staff, that's my personal opinion. There are some that can be more invasive than others, but some can be a little bit more hidden than others. So it's going to be a case by case basis. But at this point, so long as they meet the height limit, they're not considered a story, and so they've been allowed in the past.
Thank you.
Good question. Thank you.
I think there was one recently that was also approved in Monterey Vista, maybe, or Old Town. I remember going.
We looked at one a couple of, like 2 meetings ago. We looked at it and it got approved.
It sounds like maybe, Justin, this should be part of a larger conversation too about what the city thinks about that overall.
I agree. I know, I feel like every meeting we're sort of asking the city to do something, something more. But yeah, I think Carmela's in the process of addressing it because they're just, with real estate values going up and up, and everyone wanting that glimpse of an ocean, they're just going to be everywhere, and there are privacy impacts. So I think eventually the city's going to have to come up with a codified method of addressing them. So I don't know, do we have to make a motion to continue, or is this, I assume this project is just continued as is?
No.
On that, Fernanda, if this is something that we're looking at as just a turn back to the applicant, designer, to deal with this, because the question I have for you as staff is that if we basically say that they're going to submit this or move this to a redesign, then that's really not, is it a decision for us to make that motion?
You do have to make a motion either approving, continuing, or denying the project. If you decide to continue it, you can recommend redesign alternatives, or you don't have to. So it's up to the ARC.
So is this, we need to make a decision, either approve, disapprove, or continue with redesign?
Right.
Basically our options.
Yes.
In this stage in the process.
Yes.
Thank you.
Before we make-
So go ahead, Sean.
Sorry. Are we still in the question section, or are we in the comment section now?
I think we're still in the question section on this here, Shelley. So if
Okay, I don't have a question. I have a comment.
I guess I have one more question. I saw a public comment mentioning something about just the grades and significant modifications to the backyard potentially impacting drainage and things like that. Is that something that is typically an issue? Is it something that comes in front of us? Just a drainage from people making major modifications to their yards is generally an issue, and so I'm just curious. It seems like a valid question, but is that to us or to planning?
So where would the drainage occur? Did the comments say? I didn't.
I think it just mentioned the backyard. Excuse me, the backyard grade being elevated and turned largely into hardscape, something like that. I don't know. Generally, I would say if it's out of the public realm, it's not our concern as a panel. But if it's within public view, it's our concern. And so I'm just asking that however came up coming across our plate. So is that something we would raise a concern about? Is that something planning would generally do?
So usually drainage and grading issues, if the slopes are more than 15%, that's usually ARC. It requires ARC review or at least architectural review. But those most grading concerns are handled at the building permit stage, unless they impact the siting of the structure or tree removals, then that would require architectural review.
So just to go back, there were a couple of other public comments just for the record that I just wanted to share. Just give me one moment. So we do have a comment from the Monterey Vista Neighborhood Association who expressed support to deny the application. Generally, just they don't like the style and the precedent that could be set by a roof deck. And then alternatively, there was a comment that was similar from Marta Kraftzek. So I just wanted to make that known as well.
Okay, thank you. Okay. With any other questions for Chris? Open it up for comment from the public on this public appearance item. Erica, would you like to reiterate how they can join us, please?
Sure. Once again, to join the meeting from a computer or phone, use the link or phone numbers on the agenda posted at isearchmonterey.org. To join by telephone, dial 833-568-8864, then enter the webinar ID. Today's webinar ID is 161-914-9563. To provide public comment via Zoom, please use the raise your hand function at the bottom of your screen. To provide comments by phone, dial *9 to raise your hand, then *6 to unmute when called upon. Public commenters will be announced using their last 3 phone number digits or the name they've typed into Zoom. I see attendees, but no one's hands are raised.
Okay, anyone present in the chamber want to make a comment?
I don't think so. I would say that if the applicant or the homeowner wanted to speak, this would be the time if you wanted to raise your hand. Otherwise, you don't have to.
Okay, the applicant is online and his hand's raised. I'm going to go ahead and ask to unmute.
Okay.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, good afternoon. We hear you. If you'd like to state your name and address the committee, please.
Sure. This is Idris Rohina, and I am doing this extension for my parents who live in Afghanistan. My father held United States military over 15 years. And now with all these problems that the United States is facing, cannot help them. So I had to move forward and I am taking the financial responsibilities. So this extension will be mainly for them. I would take whatever recommendation you guys have. I just need an extension. And I did do the historic review. And then this extension will be at the back of the house, which will not be seen from Watson or Larkin. And then whatever suggestion you guys have, I would appreciate that. And I would like to get your suggestion to move forward. And then currently their work is in visa processing. And if they did come over here, I don't have financially, I'm not capable of renting a place. And at the same time, I would like to build something before they could come. So that's why I asked Chris if I could get some sort of recommendation. I appreciate that. Whatever design that would work, that would also work for my family, I would love to move on.
Thank you. Does any members of the committee have a question for the owner? No? All right. All right. Thank you for your input. We appreciate it. Public comment here from the committee, from the chamber. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Molly Erickson, on behalf of my mother, Carol Erickson, and my sister. My mother owns the lovely 1912 bungalow just to the south of the site. If you went to the site, you would have seen it you face it, it's the one to the right. It is H2 designated, and I am, and my family are certainly sympathetic to the reason for the addition. And we simply ask that the design be consistent with the city plans. I thought the city staff did a very good job in analyzing the problems with this current proposal. And the design is inconsistent. What we're looking for is something that's consistent with city plans. I appreciate the committee's members' questions today because there were a lot of them, and I think they were really important. And I'd like to address them very briefly. And I'm respectful of your time. One is this issue of a roof deck. It's more than just a roof deck. It's a third level roof deck. It's on top of the second story, which is a very different issue than being on top of the first story. So I think it's a new use that we're not seeing. I understand that maybe there was one approved at some point, but none exists in Lower Old Town now. None exist in Upper Old Town, as far as I know. And I think none exist in Monterey Vista. Certainly Monterey Vista Neighborhood Association commented on that. And everyone thought that it would be a dangerous precedent. And the question was raised, do we have to battle this on a case-by-case basis? And the answer is no, you don't. This really is something that the city as a whole should adopt guidelines on. This shouldn't be for you committee members to try and wrestle with on a case-by-case basis. Third level roof decks are very unusual. And if they're proposed, then they need to be vetted by the Planning Commission and the City Council, and the codes and plans need to be updated to reflect that. And it needs to go through a CEQA review process. It's not something that should be done on a case-by-case basis, or that you should have to deal with on that level. So I think this is a really important piece that's come before you. What's great is that it sounds like with the redesign that piece will go away. So you won't be faced with that when it comes back to you. And another very on-point comment was, should you essentially, how much should you comment? And the comment was made that, it's up to the applicant to design a project that's appropriate for the site and for the staff to review, because the ARC's job is to review projects. That's what it says in the city code. You review projects. You don't design them. You don't draw them. You review them as they're presented to you. So conceptually, the new idea certainly looks like it would be better because there's no roof deck, and we'd be happy to wait and see. And I hope that the applicant would have the courtesy to share that with the neighbors before resubmitting. So hopefully we can all be more on the same page when it comes before you. I would like to address two brief concerns also that were raised today. One is the issue of should the HPC review this first? Yes, this is a historic site and it is on the list according to the city's adopted plans. Now, the report that was presented with the application says that because of changes made in the last couple of years by this applicant, it is no longer historic. Well, what kind of incentive and what kind of an example does that set to other folks who buy houses that are on that list? The example it sets is all you have to do is make these changes without any approval and any permission, and boom, you can get your house off the list if you go through the process. And this one technically is still on the list and hasn't gone off the list, but it's a very difficult problem here that is also bigger than this committee. And the question I've posed the question to staff, if we're going to keep this beautiful town, this beautiful city with many wonderful historic and eligible and even just nice and consistent houses, we need to help educate, as one of the committee members said earlier as well, educate people as to how important it is to keep not just the house, but consistent balusters, consistent treatment. And it's possible. And there are very good designers who can help and wonderful contractors, as we saw from the previous item. So I think there is a long way to go on the project in process and this issue in general. In this one in particular, it was through removal of the front porch balusters and the railing and swapping out of the front door and a swapping out of the front dormer window. And because of that, the current historic preservation consultant that the applicant submitted the report from said, oh, because of that, it's no longer historic. And therefore, it should be taken off the list. This is a big question. I don't have the answer here before you today. I can suggest some, but now is not the time or place. So I wanted to raise that. And yes, it should have HPC review first because it is still on the list. Second, and finally and briefly, is this issue about the impermeable and impervious surfaces. This is also an important issue, I think, that the city may not know about. I mean, in fact, almost the entire property as of 3 years ago had a fair number of planting beds, and the whole rear yard was soil and trees. In the last 3 years, that's all changed. It is now concrete and artificial turf, and it's been raised. So the question is why is this important? For one thing, it's aesthetically and impactful. And secondly, it does affect stormwater. There is a requirement to keep stormwater on the site. We haven't seen how the drainage is going to be managed. It hasn't rained since then, but hopefully when we do get rain, there, unfortunately, there may be some impacts, and we have yet to see how that's managed. Very briefly, I said that was the last thing, but I wanted to respond to one question, which had to be with a sort of a boxy-ish addition on the north side of the property. And that, I believe, was pre the current zoning code and certainly pre the area plan. And so, as you know, that's a legal non-conforming use. That's not something we want to imitate. There are a lot of newer additions on Old Town that we don't want to imitate. That's exactly why the current codes and plans were adopted. And so that's what you're in charge of enforcing now, to make sure to keep at least what we have in place and not try and match some of the older things that were exactly what we were trying to move away from. Thanks very much for your time, and I apologize for taking so long.
All right, thank you. Thank you for your input. Okay. Any questions for the?
I just would like to remind everybody that we have a time limit for public comments too.
Usually the chair will set the limit for public comments, but I don't believe that a limit was set.
No, in the normal agenda, it's set as a 3-minute comment.
So we can hold to that 3-minute time limit if that's something we want to establish.
Okay.
You just need someone to keep track of time.
It appears the applicant has his hand up again.
Okay. All right. Go ahead. We'll acknowledge the applicant again.
Hello, everyone again. So everything that Molly has said, everything that has been done in the house, I have always put the city in the loop, and then the front porch, I have the permit that I have applied. Anything done in the backyard without touching the backyard, without removing anything, without anything, adding anything. The city was involved. They came on site. They saw everything. The drainage, everything. If Chris came on site and saw everything, the drainage, everything is way better than what it was. I don't do anything without the permit, and I don't touch anything because I do know that, like in the past, that house was in the list of historic. I did not change anything in the last 3 years that has caused. The window has not been changed in the last 3 years. Like, it was not in the original format. So it was changed long time ago. So the historic review that Chris has shows like 20 years ago, like 30 years ago, the changes were made. It's not because within the 3 years, all the changes were done, and they were all done without city's permission. Every single thing that I have done, the city has been in the loop. I have went to the city multiple times, and then I have permit for the changes that I have done. The only change that I did in the house was the window that I did not require the permit because it was going to be the exact same size, and it was not the original window on the house. It was changed like 20 years ago. So I don't see why she was saying that, like, I have changed it purposely and I haven't applied for 3 or 4 years and now I'm doing this extension. Oh, I don't want to take your time. All I want is like your suggestion. What do I need to do next? I will move forward, and I appreciate your help and your suggestion.
Okay. All right. Thank you. We'll go ahead and open this for comments from the committee or discussion from the committee.
I did drive by the residence yesterday. And I did have the same concerns that staff had, as well as some of the members of the public. I want to thank Mr. Rohina for his willingness to consider a redesign and encourage working with the neighbors to come up with a design that satisfies everyone's needs and hopes for the area.
Yeah, I just add to that. I think it's actually good, interesting community conversation on the subject. It seems like some clarity is needed just from, I don't know who it is actually, direction of planning or others to make sure some of these misunderstandings perhaps aren't being continued moving ahead. And otherwise, most of this actually probably isn't in our court as a committee, but I think I'm willing to move ahead with planning staff's recommendations, which is just to continue the redesign. I think it's wonderful that the applicant is continuing, willing to make these changes and is really open to doing that. So I think that seems like the right approach.
Thank you, Brian.
I look forward to seeing the redesign.
Can I make a motion?
Ask if Justin or anyone else has any comments or discussion. Okay, no, if not, if Zoe, if you'd like to make a motion, I'll entertain that.
Did you have something, Justin? I couldn't tell.
What's that?
I couldn't tell if Justin was getting ready to talk.
No.
Okay, awesome. I'll make a motion to continue this item for redesign.
I'll second that.
Okay, there's been a motion for continuation for redesign made by committee member Carter and seconded by Vice Chair Tregenza. Any discussion on the motion in front of the committee? Not, Erica, will you roll call for a vote, please?
Sure. Chair Hunter,
Aye.
Vice Chair Tregenza,
Aye.
Committee Member Carter,
Aye.
Committee Member Ostavar,
Aye.
Committee Member Polly,
Aye.
Committee Member Schmidt.
Aye.
Okay, the motion to carry this item to a date uncertain, carries with a vote of 6. It's approved.
Okay, all right, thank you. And this will be appealed within 10 days if to the planning commission.
Thank you.
And move on to the last item on the agenda, which is to report on the whole discussion concerning the architectural review submittal checklist for public handout. Any comment on that from that, please?
Hi, and good evening, good afternoon again. My name is Matthew Buggert. I'm an associate planner with the City of Monterey's Planning Division. There's not a staff presentation on this item, but I would like to walk through what is currently available to the public for the architectural review checklist. There are some updates that may be necessary based on either things that have evolved over time or ways in which the planning office and approach to reviews that the architectural review committee may need to be aware of or update, some of which have to do with the fact that most of our submittals are now done electronically instead of paper. Update since COVID, essentially.
You need to share the screen.
I do indeed. I will share the screen. Okay, this checklist was previously updated in 2016, April 6th, and has since remained consistent. When somebody comes into the planning office, there's printed out checklist that they can refer to, this being one of those handouts. It's also available online. It includes, similar to how it's written in our code, the introduction and applicability. It provides an overview of where the project is located and whether or not architectural review would be required. It includes consideration for existing settings at the site and whether or not architectural review would be required. And then finally, zoning in general. If the project is located in any of these areas, architectural review would be required. And if not, architectural review not required. There's a brief overview of CEQA, potential environmental review that may be necessary for a project. There's a typical two-part process for architectural review. Often these are combined in the hearings, preliminary and final. Timing requiring story polls at least 10 days prior to a administrative decision or ARC hearing. General timing updates to be considered. Information about historically significant properties or potentially historic properties. This has to do with the most recent item on the agenda that we just talked about. Potential fees that may be required, and flow charts for the architectural review process, submitting the application, staff taking a look at it for completeness and either doing an admin review and approval or it going to architectural review here. And then back with the potential to for it to be appealed or go for the building permits or both. The checklist itself is the item that we wanted to focus on updates in here. These two items are now somewhat obsolete. We used to require multiple printed out plan sets. We're intending to remove these from the submittal checklist and have them available in PDF form. The scale for those plans would still be valid and would remain. And in terms of recommendations from, or at least suggestions from us for updates, this is the main one that we're intending to remove, but we wanted to bring it in front of you for any additional thoughts or comments you may have on this submittal checklist. If there are comments at this time, great. If there are comments following the hearing, referring them to staff would be welcome. We wanted to open this up to you for your input.
Can you continue to scroll so we can see the rest of the checklist?
Absolutely. The checklist includes what is to be included on site plans, any existing structures, drainage, cut fill that may be a part of a project, stormwater drainage facilities, consideration for landscape documentation and water efficient landscaping. This one comes up relatively often, requiring a topo survey for any project within 3 feet of a required setback. So even if you're beyond the setback, you may still be required to get a topographic survey if it's within 3 feet. It often comes up that a fence is not quite on the property line. Floor plans, the rooms, the labels for the rooms, doors, windows, fixtures, second story outlines on top of the first story, finished floor elevations. If there's adjustments to the roof, that the roof slope is indicated, skylights, chimneys. On the elevations, we require finished floor heights at starting from the lowest grade, going to the first and second floor. Doors, windows, stormwater facilities. Typically when projects come in, there's a brief review from Public Works that takes a look to see how much permeable area, impervious surfaces might be included as part of a project. And they usually start tacking on requirements for the post-construction stormwater design requirements. And those are often included in conditions of approval.
What is the litmus for that review to happen? Is it just sort of You know what I mean? Is there like a certain size in a lot, a certain amount of impervious coverage that triggers that technical review, or?
Got it. Yeah. So for it at the planning level, it usually comes up as a preliminary gauging of the site plans. We pull it up on the screen, take a look at it, and they've seen a number of site plans go through, and it looks like this is going to be an addition at some point. It is something that is also checked at the building and safety review stage when they actually go for their building permits, but it's more like preliminary information that's provided to the applicant or that starts to be included on the plans. In terms of the amount of lot coverage or square footage that's added, I don't remember those numbers off the top of my head, but Fernanda might.
Yeah, the trigger, the first trigger is at 500 square feet of new or replaced coverage, impervious coverage. So at 500 square feet or more, that requires an erosion and sediment control plan. At 2,500 square feet or more of impervious coverage, it requires a preliminary stormwater control plan. So those are usually larger projects that we don't see very often. Those were
You don't consider, Fernanda, you don't consider the footprint of the house as impervious surface, I assume?
So if it's existing, we don't look at existing. It only gets triggered if it's replacement or new impervious surface.
But the footprint of the building itself, does that count as impervious surface?
The footprint of a building would count as impervious surface. Yes.
Because we just saw a brand new house 2 meetings ago that showed practically no gradient and drainage and certainly no stormwater control plan.
I'm not sure if it.
And that well exceeded 500 square feet.
So the trigger for the preliminary stormwater control plan is 2,500 square feet. I'm not sure that it exceeded that.
It's not just a percentage of the site, which is typical.
Yeah.
No, it's the first trigger is 500 square feet for the erosion and sediment control plan. And the second trigger is 2,500 square feet.
But we saw no erosion and sediment control plan either. And in fact, I bet the project we saw tonight with the garage and the balcony on top was more than 500 square feet.
So the erosion and sediment control plan is just a condition of approval that gets hashed out at the building permit stage. The preliminary water control plan, that does need to be submitted at the architectural review stage.
Okay.
So one thing I'm seeing, or at least I heard in a previous meeting also, was that some cases you would like some landscape plans and things like that. In some cases you don't, and that makes sense. That like you said, if there's a rooftop addition, that you might not need to see the plans. But the applicant isn't seeing that in this flow chart either, and neither are we as a committee. And so I think one thing is just for communication, somewhere in this, it should be very clear where he breaks out what plans are needed and required. I'm not sure I saw that. You were scrolling through pretty quickly, but
it's in the final architectural review. If you scroll down.
Yeah, we're not through scrolling.
Yeah. So and second, just for us, at the beginning of the meeting, it should just be, these were the plans that were required, these were not required. And then it can be just streamlined kind of what we're reviewing. So that would just be my early recommendation on that. And also otherwise, generally, I think our job is to review the public realm. It's what's impacting multiple people. That could be 4 or 5 neighbors. Then their view and things like that is considered kind of public realm. And so that's generally, I think, the concern of this committee. I do wonder, so you say show landscape area, front yard, only with fences, walls, etc. But then I've also heard that fences don't require permitting, which I don't understand, because I think as far as something that's visible and very much part of the public realm, that's very much, fences and walls are pretty much one of the only things you see sometimes when you're driving along roadways or walking along roadways. So I guess for me, I have just some clarification on why fences and walls either aren't required to come through us and or receive a permit. I'm just curious, have some clarification on that. Because it seems like generally things in the public realm is the idea that this committee is reviewing those things.
And Fernand, I have a question, like, for instance, like this final review guidelines, does that depend on what neighborhood they're in and what zone they're in? Or is this all city of Monterey?
So the final architectural review submittal requirements apply to all zones. Whether they have a plan or not.
So it seems
Like Oak Knoll has its own.
Oh, okay.
You know what I'm talking about?
It's neighborhood plan or
Right.
area plan. Yeah, it would apply to all architectural review applications.
Okay.
Is there a separate checklist for sign programs?
Yes.
Yes.
it seems like it's become default on most projects we're seeing just to staff is recommending preliminary and final. And I just want to be clear, the ARC has the authority to say, we don't view this as a final submittal. And we'll grant it preliminary even if staff has recommended final and preliminary.
Right, you have the
Because
decision.
it looks like it's set up to be a two-step process, but more and more it seems every project we're seeing is basically getting a pass and having a recommendation that it just be a one-step process.
So if the applicant submits information for both preliminary and final architectural review, we will bundle it into one ARC meeting.
Well, for instance, and I don't want to harp on this house, but 2 meetings ago we saw a house and they did a plan and they called it a landscape plan and they didn't show any landscape areas, fences, shrubs, trees, or general landscape materials on it. And maybe their position is, well, we're not going to do any landscaping. I guess, Payam, I think you brought that comment up at the last meeting. It's a landscape plan if it doesn't show any landscape on it. So they essentially checked a box for final architectural review, but they haven't really completed a landscape plan.
Well, I think more importantly, we asked if it was required, and I believe we were told it's not required for something of this size.
Okay.
And I'm not seeing that here in this checklist, there's some stipulation of that organizational tree to happen. And that was my first comment, was just, I'm not seeing, this type of chart seems like it makes sense for those type of questions as to what actually is required in that, both for the applicant and for us reviewing, so that the applicant, if planning department says, no, you don't need a landscape plan for this project, which would seem strange for one like that one, that's grading and changing so much of it,
yeah.
Then okay. But if that's but they should then not have just submitted a crayon plan, right? Like something, it should be real and legitimate. You mentioned, I think one of these checklists was also a surveyed grading plan, and it didn't look like that was a surveyed plan, but no,
that was definitely not a surveyed grading plan.
So just it seems like quite often we are questioning if the applicants are getting through these checklists properly, and that shouldn't be our job, I think. This was sort of the question there. And if it's not required, then let's just be clear to both the applicant and to the panel what we're reviewing, and so that we're not asking these questions, from the get-go of where's this, where's that, I'm not seeing this. If they weren't required to have it, then they're not required to have it. Fine. But if it is, and it looks like it still is here in this checklist, then we're getting mixed messages as to if it is or isn't. And I heard pushback from other ARC members saying we're discussing something that's not required, but then we're reading these things that say they are required.
They are required, yeah.
A similar thing happened with the Garden Road properties too.
Yeah, I think there were several that Justin, you brought up, just multiple instances where it's come up recently where there's less and less of this material that seems like it's required as part of the checklist. And I do remember one of those, maybe that was Garden Road, I forget, somewhere near there. We did only approve preliminary, not secondary. So we are aware of that, and I think we know that's an option. But it would be nice if we felt more confident that these checklists were being followed and things were being brought to us that were complete in that regard.
Yeah, and I think did I hear staff say that this checklist is, you're updating the top section for the submittal requirements in terms of 8.5 by 11, 11 by 17 or something like that? I mean, is there a wholesale sort of review of this checklist? Because I know in other jurisdictions, we have checklists that say a grading and drainage plan shall contain at bare minimum these items. And finished floor elevation, tops of retaining walls, finished grades at the corners of the buildings and things like that. And just going back to that project that we saw with the scribbled crayon drawing for the grading and drainage plan, when I went back and looked at it more carefully and cross-referenced it with the elevations after the hearing, it was clear that, I think it was clear that, the oak trees that we commended them on saving are going to die within a year of that foundation being excavated. And again, they just scribbled in crayon something and called it a grading and drainage plan. And it just seems like you could probably meet this checklist without providing a lot of information. And so, for instance, he says, illustrate all proposed grading, including cut and fill. That was, those big yellow scribbles and the big green scribbles on there. But there was no real finished grades denoted on that. There was no, calculations for the amount of cut and fill it looked like. And so I just wonder if we need to give a more nuanced checklist that tells people what exactly needs to be on these drawings. And I think it helps the ARC too, because we don't have to sit there and do sort of a investigation of incomplete drawings to figure out what's going on.
So one recommendation could be to make this checklist part of the submittal requirement. So the applicant has to go through the checklist and tell us where in the sheets we can find this information.
Wait, are you saying it's not part of their submittal requirement?
So I'm saying attaching this checklist as part of the architectural plans and telling us where, like what sheet number we can find each of these things.
In some respects, that almost, in my opinion, it would almost make more sense just having the checklist, when we define what the requirements are, to be a part of the submittal there. Okay, these things have been done. The applicant understands what needs to be included and where it's located. And then, it gives us a ready look at, okay, are there pieces of information that we would need to consider or want to consider that is or isn't in the package? To me, it would make sense. Making the checklist itself a part of the package would make sense.
So just so
Yeah, I don't think they necessarily need to, I think they just need to check the box if they provided it. I don't know that on each line item, they need to tell you where that information is. That might be a little bit arduous, but it's helpful. You know, no matter how many plans we produce, we still download, whether it's the city of Carmel, the city of Monterey, or Monterey County, we still download the checklists and we check the boxes and we look at our plans and make sure that everything's included on that. In those jurisdictions, I know at the county level, we have to submit the checklists with the applications to show that we've checked those boxes and we're including that information.
So just so I understand, Fernanda, this checklist is only for staff?
No, it's available to the public,
Okay.
but it's not a requirement to give us a copy of this checklist with the boxes
Is it
checked.
provided to all applicants for planning or building?
We do tell them where it is online,
Okay.
so we direct them to it.
Most email correspondence with applicants, at least that I have, it's, hey, you're about to submit this. Here's the link to this handout. The checklist is at the end of the items that we look for.
Well, I'd like to just say that I'm a little embarrassed and frustrated to say this is the first time I've seen this checklist. And I'm sure when I became a member of the Architectural Review Committee, it was pointed out that this is the stuff you should bone up on. But this, like today, when I opened my packet, this was the first time I saw it. So yeah, there's stuff in here that I didn't know that was even in our purview. Fences for one thing, landscaping. So I think it's important when you guys get new committee members, and maybe you did point this out to me, but make sure that they know exactly what is in their purview as far as like, yeah, there's this checklist thing. And I'm sure I probably got all this information when I joined, but yeah, it's kind of frustrating for me to like see all this stuff that I could have been using as tools and guidelines for the past 4 years.
And I would almost recommend having this checklist not be a separate document from the planning application.
Agreed.
It's just literally a part of the planning application. So when you download the form and you hit print, it's going to print out 4 pages, and these are going to be 2 of them. That way, it's always attached, and people always know.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm just seeing even, some of these walls. Walls are very typically something for review. And I know there have been a number of site plans where I've had to ask, where are your retaining walls? It looks like you're going to have them. And they couldn't be pointed out. We just had to trust that they were there.
I'm sorry, I have to hop off.
Okay.
I think we need to definitely add this and make this more available and have our applicants go through this process for sure. I don't know that I've ever seen it before either, so this is really helpful for me too.
All right. Thanks, Zoe.
Thank you. Yeah, I would just say again, kind of something I've mentioned that I think, again, my belief is that the purpose of this panel is for reviewing the public realm, things that impact multiple numbers of people. Sometimes that can be something in the rear of a house because it's visible to a lot of neighbors and affects the neighborhood. But there's a threshold for what those changes are or why they impact somebody. And so generally, I'm in agreement. This should be given with part of that package so that applicants, it's very clear that they must have these items on there. But then if the planning, if you're hoping that we're going to overlook something like a landscape plan, then I think that just needs to be called out, and why. At the beginning of the review process for the project, part of the presentation, we're asking you to overlook the landscape plan because X. have some reason for it. And then we don't spend time asking for it and wondering why it wasn't there.
Okay, excellent discussion. I personally am going to take put it as my homework to go over this a bit more just to see what I understand, and I'll submit to Matthew. Submit to Matthew any changes or recommendations for this.
Yeah, the updates to this document have been worked on, or at least discussed briefly between Fernanda and I. So either way, it works. So the recommendations that were given today may not apply directly to this list, but in terms of what information is given to you guys at hearings, or things that you'd like to see more of, I welcome them all.
Okay.
Is there a deadline for when you plan to reissue this?
No, it's at your discretion when to update the checklist. So that's why we're discussing it today, so we get feedback from you and we can come back with an amended checklist.
So I guess I didn't hear any, let's just see, I didn't hear any really dramatic changes being requested from the panel, more just that it is followed, because I think we thought sometimes things like this were being left out.
I think there needs to be more information on grading and drainage. I don't think this checklist is real. Yeah, is real demanding in terms of that requirement. You know, think about some of the size of those projects on Garden Road, and you know, there's no requirement. You know, in a lot of places where if you're moving more than 100 cubic yards of dirt, your grading and drainage plan is required to be completed by either a licensed civil engineer or a licensed landscape architect. And I think that's something, we may want to consider, and that allows single family houses to avoid it. But, large housing projects that are clearly moving significant amounts of dirt, and having retaining walls like the things you're talking about, really understand how those were built and how that landscape is going to be shaped. I think that's sort of, and on these bigger projects, I feel like we really lacked landscape plans and outdoor spaces, and how these buildings were putting several hundred people on a site, and there's really very little thought being given to how they're going to occupy that site when they're outside of their apartments. I feel like that's a big gap in the checklist.
Yeah, I mean, clearly fences are on here too, retaining walls, says manufactured slopes. So these things are on there, and we just often haven't seen them, or told they would be done later because they don't require a permit, but then they're just skirting, getting around this body. So that is a question. It's part of it really is what, because I don't want to be reviewing all of those things in great detail. I want to review what affects the visual, physical feel and character for the public. All those other things I think should be just reviewed by planning in a very efficient way, but we have to trust that that's being done. So I assume there's a different checklist, or is there not, for planning approval?
Different, what do you mean by different checklists?
Well, I mean, this checklist is pretty robust, which is good. But I would guess if there's some things that are reviewed and covered by just the planning department that are more related to just public safety, which we're less about, this body, right? We're more about kind of the look and feel and character of places. Stormwater drainage facilities, I care very much about that, but is that really for this committee? Unless I think all of those things should be handled before getting to us. It does matter because they affect the look and feel, but whether or not they're functioning properly, et cetera, we shouldn't be having to review that as an ARC. So it's kind of like wanting to make sure that those really robust functional things are there and covered, but then that we're really reviewing just the things that matter from a public character and just kind of look and feel perspective. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree with Graham on that. Whether it drains properly really isn't, I don't think, of our concern. It's like, what does it look like from the street? What's the visual, what's the subjective look of something? And as far as something is, whether it's structurally sound or, all the engineering that goes into it, that's a different department, I think. But I think as far as ARC goes, the mass, and the setbacks and the materials and, does it go with the roof and all of that stuff that, and that will include grading and slopes and fences and landscaping and outdoor, hard surfaces and stuff like that, benches and gazebos and all that. But I don't think, as far as like Justin was talking about, drainage and I don't think that's necessarily our, under our, purview as far as, aesthetically, is that an eyesore or not? Well, yeah, it should definitely be looked into, but I think that's more of a planning or our building department thing.
I would like to see it, that's been checked and reviewed before. It's nice to know that feels like homework on the applicant's part. Those things have been done. Planning says this is good. They're handing it off to us, right? At that point, all of those other things have been checked and double checked. And so now we're just looking at it from kind of an aesthetics and character perspective.
So,
and I think a grading and drainage plan should be part of that package. Whether or not we get into the volume calcs of whether an area drain can handle it, I totally agree with you guys. But I think we should see a plan that shows drains on it. Whether or not they work, again, that's not our purview, but we're not seeing that currently.
But Justin, I'm not an engineer and I don't know how to even read a plan like that. So that,
But that's why you're required to have landscape architects and architects on these panels, Patrick.
All right.
I
don't think we're required to, but it's bonus.
You are.
Well, I mean, you can.
When I came on, it said that we were required to have an architect on the board.
It is. I mean, it's generally, if for the more public projects, if it's a drain in somebody's personal property, we're almost certainly going to be like, who cares? But if it ends up landing,
big projects.
Yeah, if it ends up landing in the public right of way, in a sidewalk or whatever, that's generally, we should know that.
So I just want to clarify then. So for the Garden Road projects, those required a preliminary stormwater control plan for the ones that would have 2,500 square feet or more of disturbance. So those preliminary stormwater control plans were included in the packet, but
they were in there. Okay.
Yes, but are you then saying that you want them to be illustrated differently?
No, I think so. My recollection of that project was that we started to hear mention of a number of outdoor amenities, say a patio or a path, and those weren't shown. And so then that raises into question, because usually putting in even a path or another patio in the landscape would change the grading and would change some of those things. That's my memory of those projects and conversation. But so I think that's where it started to be like, well, wait a minute, we must not actually be reviewing a really complete plan yet. Is that everybody else's memory of that?
Yeah, that's my memory of those projects on Garden Road. Yes, I agree with you.
I just seem to recall very schematic site plans.
Yeah.
On those projects for the scale of the project, and the stormwater control plan may have been in there. I guess my bigger concern is whether or not it's an official stormwater control plan, I just think like anything, a new house or a significant addition should have a grading and drainage plan.
Yeah. I think the point we're making in that is if it's in there, what is it actually a drawing of? If we're then being told that the full site plan, it's kind of, not there yet. Because obviously how the grading is done for a new path or a patio or all these other things affects that grading and drainage. And so then it's really a grading and drainage plan that's incomplete as well. Right?
So the Garden Road, 2600 Garden Road, they wanted to keep the center of the site intact. They didn't want to remove the trees, but they did show paths on the site plan. So I just want to understand. So do you want more than just a site plan showing paths? Do you want photos, or how would you like applicants to illustrate those things?
I'm still trying to remember. I mean, I didn't remember. I remembered somebody saying, oh, well, we mentioned an area of it. Oh, well, actually, we're going to be doing this or something. It's like, well, which is it? And then typically we do want to see just a really basic material palette for what that plan is. And it can be preliminary. It can be suggestions. It can be, this is the direction we're headed with this kind of thing. Although typically, I guess for final, that's not what we'd like. But I believe that when we bumped it back to preliminary. So yeah, I mean, and I guess, show landscape areas in front of the yard, fences, walls, general landscape materials. So, I mean, that's in this checklist right there. And I can't recall, but I feel like maybe there weren't materials shared. And for sure, and for sure, a number of them, there's nothing, and we're being asked to review it.
Yeah, my recollection of the Garden Road projects is that they had civil engineers that showed the drainage, but that those were really sort of undeveloped landscape plans. And then on the house we saw 2 meetings ago, I felt there was a really, really incomplete grading and drainage plan. And so there's sort of different issues. I thought, and I think it was the Paul Davis project, where we were looking at some outdoor areas and just sort of questioning, where the outdoor areas were and what was happening with them. And Paul said, yeah, we're going to develop that down the line. And I recall that meeting distinctly because at that point, I didn't realize we could grant a preliminary review without a final review. And it wasn't until the next project was presented that we were told we could do that. Whereas we had just previously granted the Paul Davis project preliminary and final because we didn't know we could just put the brakes on and give it preliminary. And it was the second project where, again, I think, they might have handled all their grading because they were basically reusing a lot of the existing paths. But again, there was very little development in terms of the landscape plan, what the hard surfaces were, what the planting areas were there any outdoor congregation areas for residents in the building and things like that. It just, my recollection is it was sort of lacking in that area, not necessarily stormwater. But then again, going back to the new house we saw a couple of meetings ago, that was just technically a really incomplete grading and drainage plan. And I think that the end result of that is going to be that trees, when that pad is cut, when those retaining walls are put in, trees are going to die as a result. And if we had seen a more complete grading and drainage plan, we might have been able to catch that.
There is an arborist on that project too. So that's what kind of put my mind at ease was there was an arborist that was going to be there when all trenching was done and making his recommendations. So that's kind of what set my mind at ease on that project particularly.
Yeah, it's a little bit, what's difficult is that some of that we just it isn't, yes, we can be concerned about the trees and that's the character and flavor and feel of the neighborhood.
Yeah.
But it isn't our position through it. We were told that there was all this front end work that was done. And so at a certain point, we have to trust that it was, that permits were received, granted for cutting trees, that permits were granted for pruning, and permits were granted for doing a trench to look at, and an arborist was involved. So, I mean, and those are protected trees also. There are grades of trees in the area. So I'm concerned as well, but at a certain point for what this body reviews, that's when it gets put into our court, and the rest of it is in the planning department's court. And that's
I'd like to ask a question on that, because if the arborist is reviewing, the arborist isn't reviewing the project, and maybe planning can help us out here. Is the arborist reviewing the project during construction? Are they reviewing actual construction plans?
We tried, I believe we attempted to put some stipulation that the arborist would be on site during major construction. I asked the question, how are you enforcing that? And that's another challenge.
Well, I don't understand why an arborist can't review a proposed plan.
So the Garden Road projects, they're all coming back to you for final architectural review. None of them were approved for final. And we will make sure that they submit a complete landscape plan. So for today, I think we're looking for language that we can incorporate into the submittal checklist to satisfy all of your concerns. So if you want to propose language for the section about drainage, because right now it just says illustrate, that's the key word, and it doesn't really say how. It's been left to the applicant on how to do that. So we're looking for language. And regarding the arborist, we can create conditions of approval and we can do our best to enforce them. However, at some point, it's up to the applicant to also follow the conditions. And we rely on our code compliance division to make sure that those are being enforced. And our also neighbors, we receive lots of complaints from neighbors that.
Yeah.
And so that's how we do that.
Well, on this, as far as looking for language or changes to this is necessary, I don't know if we should go through this at this particular thing, or should we take the proposed document, go through it, and make recommendations, that if there are better language or more specific comments that you would like to see as far as what the landscape plan is, drainage plan is, what those are, to submit those to you and to Matthew. And then the other thing that I would like to see, and I think it's kind of a feeling I get from some of these, is that to actually include this in the package that the applicant is given, that okay, when you're done with this, that these are checked off, and that when we see it in the package of materials that we get, that this stuff, okay, this has been done, the applicant has provided these things, staff and the building, whatever, have accomplished those things in this checklist appropriately, then I think we can do what Payam suggests or describes as what is the public impact or impact on the public of these things that we're dealing with, as far as sizing, mass, character, design, and whatever like that would be more appropriate. So that's kind of where I think, my opinion of where we should go forward with this. That's something that's not, oh, here's a checklist, if you want to get it, download it. I actually think, in addition to the proposed changes in language, that members of the committee would have and staff would have, is making this a mandatory part of the package that goes to the applicant and that they submit to you and to us.
I think that sounds reasonable, but I'm not sure if perhaps the way I'm reading the room is that people would like some time to look at this, which makes sense. I think people the committee should have some time to review this, craft our wording, and either it's in email, but it seems like the conversation regarding that wording should be made public and should probably just be a separate meeting.
Yeah, we can come back. We can come back at a later meeting and continue the discussion if you feel like you need more time to review it.
That's my read of the room, is that people would like time to review this and craft our wording and then come back and review the wording together.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's an accurate assessment from them.
I'm just seeing, I was just seeing this, the bottom small text here. So at the discretion of Chief Planning, Engineering, Environmental Compliance, they can be waived. So, and that's something I think you were mentioning to us, Fernanda, on one of these discussions. And I think that makes sense, that there might be reason to waive some of these things, but that those should just be very much brought to our attention before we're reviewing, and of course be brought to the applicant's attention so they can cross them off. And when that's done, we should just be told why something was waived. We waived this because they weren't making any changes, X, whatever.
Yeah, that's totally reasonable. It makes sense. Can we, sorry, I forgot. Can we see if there's anyone from the public who would like to comment? Do we see anyone online?
I don't see anybody online. Would you like me to remind them how to participate?
No, that's fine.
No, it's okay.
So we can just, I mean, there's no motion required. We can just come back at a later date.
I don't know if appropriate to say in this format that I'd encourage all the committee members to review this and submit comments to staff on wording and requirements and other items that we've discussed, so that when we come back to this at a future meeting, that we're prepared to talk more specifically about the things that we want to see, how to approach them.
Sorry, so that was a little different than I was suggesting, which was that we just come back and discuss at the next meeting. You're recommending, I guess, email them ahead of time. Is that correct?
I'm just saying that my suggestion is that if we email them in before the next meeting that we go to talk about it, then we have concrete items that we can review in advance and discuss them, I think, more time efficient manner of doing it once we have the examples of input from the different committee members would be helpful.
Just don't reply to all.
Yeah, just don't reply to all.
Yeah. And I just want to say, planning department, please speak up as well if you have issues or concerns or countering arguments to the way things are done on this, even though it's related to us. A lot of it's related to how the two are working with each other.
I think a beneficial thing that we can do is not only send links to this architectural review checklist, but there was a question about the sign packages and requirements we have for sign guidelines. We can send that along. There is an existing fence handout. There are a number of handouts that are provided or are maybe not provided, available and given depending on the permit application. But I think we can send an email that kind of gives an overview and links to all those for your review.
Great, thank you.
Is there two different sets of checklists for commercial and residential,
No, it's one for all architectural review.
but not signs?
No, signs is a separate
Signs is
permit
separate.
type, so it's a separate handout.
Any other comments? Well, if there are no other comments, I'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting at 6:15. Thank you.